Hi there! Welcome to Pallet University. Today we are talking about the fourth course that you visit to take photos on in new Pokemon Snap, the Maricopia Reef on Maricopia Island. We've already talked about sort of the large-scale diversity in the whole game of new Pokemon Snap, as well as the smaller-scale diversity for some of the individual courses. If you have not seen those videos, make sure to go check them out up in the cards. For as diverse as you would think a reef is, coral reefs are some of the most diverse environments here in the real world, the reef course in new Pokemon Snap is shockingly lacking in diversity. The evening version of the course is tied for second to last overall among all of the courses for diversity, while the daytime version of the course is tied for last. When it comes to the actual environment itself, the reef course is only like slightly a reef. Reefs, geologically speaking, are structures that are raised off the seafloor that are made out of biogenic material, a material made by life. By that definition, yeah, the reef course probably is technically a reef, but from a layperson's perspective, you would not go through this if you weren't told that it was a reef and be like, yeah, that's definitely a reef, because you don't actually go underwater at all to see the reef part of the reef. I've snorkeled on coral reefs before, and basically nothing happens like on the surface of the water. You'll get some birds and things, but like the fish don't really ever go there, because why would they? There's not nothing that happens on the surface, but much less than if your only experience of reefs is this game. Out of the 21 evolutionary lines present on either the day or evening version of this course, only about 75% are aquatic. 25-ish% are not aquatic, above the water. And those percentages seem like they're very off. If you were to actually snorkel on a reef, it would probably be much closer to like 95% aquatic, 5% maybe not aquatic. And even then, it would only be things like birds, seabirds that are like comfortable in the water, not things like Machamp or things like Vivian. Neither of those really make sense to be here. I'm also just very confused about sort of the columns of rock raised up out of the water, especially in sort of the deep part of the course. The course starts off, you're in sort of a reefy area with some columns of rock sticking up. Those also don't really make sense, but whatever. Then you sort of go into an area between two reefs where the water gets apparently quite deep, which we'll also talk about in a second. But even in this really deep part, there are just these columns of rock just jutting out of the water, which, as a geologist, I really racked my brain to figure out exactly how those structures could form, and I kinda got nothing. Like, how did they get there? Were they sort of uplifted, or was there more rock around it that got eroded away, leaving these columns for some reason? That can sometimes happen with features called buttes, but not like in water? I've never heard of just a literal column of rock being formed in the way a butte is formed. So let alone multiple of them kind of all over the place on a reef. If they weren't on a reef, if they're just like on a beach, okay, that kind of makes sense, because presumably there was rock there, the rest of it got eroded away, and it just left this column of rock left that was more erosion resistant. But like out on a reef, that just geologically does not make any sense. Once again, one of my really big nitpicks with Pokemon, apparently regardless of who develops the game, whether it's, Game Freak or whatever company made Pokemon Snap, its name is escaping me, but no matter who is making a Pokemon game, they just don't care about the geology, which really bothers me as a geologist. So, moving on. Most of the Pokemon that actually show up in the course sort of make sense to be there, but there are some that definitely don't. Why is Wailord here? I really don't understand it, because presumably this is a coral reef. You see Corsola there, you see Marini, which eat Corsola and likely other kinds of coral. So if this is a coral reef, that means that it needs to be close enough to the surface in relatively shallow water, because corals need to do photosynthesis. If they're too far down, they can't get enough sunlight and they die. So if this water is so shallow enough for corals to live, what is a Wailord doing here? Wailord is, up until Generation 8, the largest Pokemon. And I really don't understand. No whale would ever come to a reef without being like in desperate need of finding some form of food, or it's going to starve, or just incredibly like sick, and or maybe just super old with like dementia or something. There's no good reason for a whale to go to a reef. And yes, sometimes animals get stuck in weird places in the wild. However, like in the wild, those animals die. They don't get to reproduce and make babies who are potentially prone to getting stuck in weird places and dying, which therefore encourages, less risk averse, less getting stuck averse babies and a less getting stuck, prone population. That's how natural selection works. Whaler makes a little more sense than whale lore does, but like, still not a lot, especially if they're both filter feeding whales, which they seem to be. I just really don't think either of them make any sense, but we're moving on. Also, a slightly similar case for Lapras. At first I kind of thought Lapras was like supposed to be a cold water exclusive Pokemon because, well, one, it's an ice type, and two, you, at least in some of the older games, found it mostly in just colder places. You find it like deep in a cave in Generation 2. Where do you even find it in Generation 1? You can't find it in Generation 1, actually. At least in like the first Generation 1 games, it has to be given to you. But in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the only place that you find them is around the Seafoam Islands. Cold. But apparently it can be found in tropical places too. I mean, they find one in the Orange Islands, which seem fairly tropical to me. So, but also, fish use the reef as shelter to hide in it from big, scary things, such as Lapras, who eats fish. And so Lapras probably just would not have a good time hunting on a reef. So I really don't think Lapras would really make sense to be here either. Also, just as a side note, and something that I actually think of is very amusing, I'm pretty sure they just put Machamp both in the beach in last episode, which I didn't actually think about until I was writing the script for this episode. But Machamp was there too. But Machamp is in this course, I think almost exclusively because it's wearing a Speedo, and it poses for the camera. It makes like a muscly jock pose in a Speedo. That's, I'm pretty sure, the only reason that they put it in this course, which I think is really funny. Like always in the series, let's take a look at some of the Pokemon that should hypothetically be here, but that we don't actually see. Like I said earlier, there are 21 different evolutionary lines present in these courses, which, again, overall is pretty low in terms of diversity. This doubles to 42 if you count every Pokemon that should be there, like in its evolutionary line, which is also pretty low compared to the other courses that we've talked about. Like with the beach, this could be because some of the juvenile versions, the pre-evolutions of some Pokemon, still live closer to shore, and when they sort of evolve, grow up, they move out to the reef to be adults there. But that would only work for some Pokemon. Like, for example, that would work fine for Mantike, Carvana, and probably Poplio. But for the most part, a lot of the Pokemon that we see on the reef are the first stage in their evolutionary line, so that doesn't work for all of them. Some of them can be explained, such as Clamperl. Both of its evolutions, Huntail and Gorbis, are canonically known to live in like the very deep ocean, so they might come up to the reef to reproduce, have their babies, and then the adults go back to the deep water. I could see that. And then sort of the other way for Inkay, who's found in the reef, Malamar is pretty terrestrially, land adapted. So I could see Malamar going out to the reef to lay its eggs and reproduce, and then going back to land where it lives. So that explains a good chunk of it, but not all of it. And since I already talked about Machamp, the rest of the Machamp line probably just lives inland, back in the brush of the beach course. So, however, one Pokemon that really should be here that is not is Toxapex. I mean, its pre-evolution Marini is here. There's plenty of coral to eat, apparently, because it's a reef. The Pokemon Corsola, which it canonically eats, which also, it could probably just eat the reef itself if it can eat Corsola. Its food there, its pre-evolutions are there, so I don't understand why there's not a good reason for Toxapex to not be there. But let me know your thoughts on some of these weird, quirky aspects of the reef course that may or may not actually be sort of a reef. If you have not seen the other videos in this series, or if you have not seen our recent sort of major life update, please go, especially the life update, please go make sure that you see that. It's very important news for anybody who happened to not see it. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science. A massive thank you to our Patreon supporters, Patty Murphy, Sam Accardi, and Jameer Connolly. Your support is way Lord-sized appreciated. And lastly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.